Hi, readers. It's Lori. Welcome back to my channel, Books, Ink, and Paper, or welcome if this is your first time. And I am attempting to get back in the swing of filming some content. I am still not 100%, but I'm definitely much better. I have taken almost this entire week off of work. I've just had my one-on-one clients availability that was already scheduled. Otherwise, I literally just rested. I was directed to do so by a colleague, friend, leader that I admire and respect, and I'm grateful to her because yeah, I was just, this one really took me down. I mean, I've been sick before in my life, but this one was pretty intense. So I'm hoping this is the end of it for me and for my partner and for everyone in my family because it's just like we've just been one man down at least for a while. So my reading wrap up for 2024 is a little late, and I apologize for that, but I don't, there's nothing I could do. So I know that you understand that. So let's talk about a little bit about stats, and then I'm going to share with you what my favorite five-star reads were for the year. I did a four-star read video earlier, and but the five-star reads, it was tricky. I don't know that I can choose one over the others. It's really hard, but I think I have one. I think so. But it was a good reading year for sure. I had a lot of four-star reads for sure, and I had a good number of five-star reads too. So let's go to the stats. So I read 72 books in the year. I thought it was 73, and then I realized as I was reviewing it that there was one that had been duplicated for some reason, and so I had to fix and adjust that. I will say that neither Storygraph nor Goodreads is perfect for me, and I'm not sure what the answer to that is, but I'm looking at Storygraph stats today, so hopefully these are pretty accurate, but 72 books, 25,465 pages. The first book I read in the year of 2024 was S.A. Cosby's Razor Blade Tears, which was a backlist book of the month for me, and I had never read anything by S.A. Cosby, and it was quite a ride. I have to say, I am very impressed by S.A. Cosby, and I do plan to read All the Sinners Bleed probably this year because that's on my backlist as well. And then the last book I read in the year, which was not intended, I had planned on having a really robust wrap up this last month, but the last book I read was The Christmas Tree Farm by Lori Gilmore. That's the third book in her series, and I've talked about it before, but I really did enjoy that, and I probably will go back and read the Cinnamon Bun Cafe too, and then I hear she has another one coming out in 2025. They're just easy popcorn kinds of palate cleansers and predictable, fun, a very different relationship to that book than S.A. Cosby's Razor Blade Tears. His book was fantastic. It was dark and difficult, but it was fantastic. I had a pretty high map. It peaked first part of the year, and then it kind of leveled out, and then it peaked again toward the end of the year. So that made me happy that I did a lot of reading in the last few months of the year. I think a lot of that had to do with the baby coming in August and just all the preparation for the baby and those kinds of things. So I think that definitely was something that took a huge priority, and we're so grateful for it. The month that I read the most pages was February. I'm not entirely sure why, but I definitely read a lot of pages in February, 2,925, and 8 books in February as well. So that was a good reading month. And I, of course, met my goal that I had set. The genres that I spent the most time with, there was a tie for mystery and thriller, which usually that's sort of blurbed both of them for most titles these days, so that was not a surprise. Contemporary was next, actually. Historical was after that, and then literary fiction. I've read 14 of those. Now, I will say that the contemporaries, I really did read a lot more romances this last year than I typically do. I'm really happy with that. I enjoyed that experience, and I'm looking forward to seeing how this plays out in 2025, whether I will continue to read more romance or whether I will add some sci-fi in or, something different. But I am sort of a person who doesn't like the repetitive mundane too long. So, I have to shake things up a little bit. The longest book I read in the year of 2024 was The Covenant of Water, no surprise there, by Abraham Verghese. That was 724 pages, and I may have read that in February, so that may have been why that month peaked so high. The shortest book I read was The Doll's House by Lisa Unger, which was really a novella, an original Amazon series book, and this one was only 98 pages. So it kind of feels like a little bit of a cheat to count that as a book, but it does count as a book on Goodreads. The average length of the books that I read was 344 pages, which does seem normal to me, and it took me around 10 days to finish each book. Now, again, that just depends on my life and the amount of pages in each one, but also just whether or not they were compelling, whether or not I could read them really quickly, what my work schedule was like. There are lots of factors that really can't be attributed to whether or not the book was good or not good. In fact, I have read something this week that I'm stunned by how fast I read it. I was not expecting that to happen. I'll share that with you soon, but it really only was because I took most of this time off this week that I had the time to be able to read like that. I feel like when I retire, my reading will just be astronomical if this is any indication. The most time I spent to read one book was Never Far From Home by Bruce Jackson. And that's not because it wasn't good. It really is because I picked it up from NetGalley, started reading it, and then I dropped it for a really, really long time. So it took me 168 days to finish Never Far From Home, but it shouldn't have. I just didn't prioritize it the way I could have. And the authors that I spent the most time with in this last year, this surprised me a little bit, but then again, not so much. I had more reading that was one and done, so to speak, new authors to me and books I hadn't planned to read maybe, and I kind of found a bright, shiny object. So I didn't do a lot of repeat author reading this year, which is interesting. And I'm, again, sort of wondering what 2025 will be like since I do want to focus on my backlist so much. But the author that I spent the most time with in 2024, I wonder if any of you can guess. I was surprised. It's TJ Klune. Yeah, TJ Klune. Louise Penny was in second place there, tied with Kristen Hanna. So I did read two Kristen Hanna books this year, and I read two Louise Penny books this past year. But I read three of TJ Klune's books, and so that was interesting. And my average star rating this year was 3.97. So now we're going to talk about the books that really stood out on my 5-star read shelf. And again, I'm going to have one at the end that I think will be the winner, so to speak. But I'm not sharing all of the 5-star reads. I'm just sharing the ones that I think are going to stay with me the longest. So the first one actually is Garlic and the Vampire by Brie Paulson. It may surprise you. This is a graphic novel, middle grade graphic novel that I picked up early in the year because it was talked about, I think, in a bookish retreat that I attended. And it just sounded like so much fun. And so I wanted to read it as soon as possible. So again, this is a graphic novel. This is about a character who is a bulb of garlic, and she shares her wares at the local farmers market with a number of other characters, and she is just so sweet. But then there's a home at the top of the hill where this community is located, and that home has been abandoned and now it isn't. And they are concerned that there's a vampire living in that home. And so they, of course, dispatch Garlic to go and find out if that's indeed true, because obviously Garlic and the vampire. It is so adorable. I really wanted to read this to my kiddos this year and I didn't get to, but I feel like that's definitely going to happen. There's a couple that I don't own that I'm going to talk about before I forget. One of them is The Covenant of Water by Abraham Verghese. This was one that I had to read for the BookTube prize, and I was very intimidated by it. I was pretty sure I wasn't going to like it, and I really was like worried that I wouldn't get it finished in time. None of those things happened. I really enjoyed it. I did a combination of a library borrow as well as an audio that I picked up on Libro.fm. And I think I even had the ebook for a while on Kindle, borrowed from my library, but it was absolutely stunning. Now, it spans decades. It spans a number of people. It is it is historical fiction. It is sometimes so difficult. It feels so heavy at times. And yet you're with those people, and I at least stayed with those people and wanted to make sure that I learned what their outcomes were and how they survived. And it was just absolutely beautiful. I had never read anything by this author. I suspect I will try to read another one by Abraham Verghese. He does narrate himself in the audiobook, and I can't say that that was the easiest for me. I'm not sure. He wasn't a terrible narrator by any stretch, don't get me wrong, but it was sometimes a little difficult. I think it was just maybe there was not much inflection sometimes. It was just a little bit more monotone. However, that didn't take away from my rating of the book at all. And I'm glad that I attacked it in all three ways, because that made it much easier, but it also gave me sort of sometimes my eyes could take a rest and sometimes my ears could take a rest. And so, yeah, it was just really one of my favorites for this year. As was The Reformatory by Tananarive Due. I had owned The Reformatory. I had purchased it in 2023 on audio from Libro, and I had never listened to it, but it was one that I really wanted to listen to. And then it was one of the ones that were selected for my group with the BookTube prize. So I was delighted by that, because I wanted to take it off my backlist and I wanted to give it the time that it deserved. And I absolutely loved it. In fact, that was the one that I rated the highest of all of the books that I was given to read for that BookTube prize round. The Reformatory is a book about a young boy named Robert who is growing up in Florida, and he is a Black child. He is being raised by his sister predominantly, his father having to flee because he is wanted for a number of things that he didn't do. And Robert is having a little bit of trouble at school. He gets into a fight one day and he's sent to a reform school as a result. Now, the judge at first is pretty supportive of Robert. Robert is very young. I feel like he was 12, something like that, 11, 12. He was very, very young. And the judge does seem to be sympathetic to Robert. However, it is in the Jim Crow law times, and he's not going to let him off without a sentence. So he sends him to this reformatory. The reformatory is run by a very horrid man and a number of other very horrid people who do not treat these young Black boys well. But there's also some other things happening underneath the surface at the reformatory, and Robert can hear and see things that other people can't hear and see. Meanwhile, his sister and his godmother are trying to find a way to get Robert released, and they're trying to make sure that he's okay, and they are often blocked by all kinds of resistance and laws and judges that won't do anything differently. And it is just beautifully written. I loved the afterword where she talks about her family and the history and what led her to write this book. I really think it's a must read for anyone who is a fan of historical fiction, particularly set in this time period. and it's a very, very meaningful book. So I would say that that was the top vote in my, the books that I read in the BookTube prize, but it's definitely at the top. It was hard for me. I can't really say these are in order of this and that because they're that close for me, but that one was so, so good. Another one that surprised me, and an author that I wanted to get to for a long time, Amor Towles, and I really enjoyed The Lincoln Highway way more than I thought that I would. This was a chunker as well, and I was a little intimidated by the size of it. It is 574 pages long. And this one is about a young man who was also incarcerated and is released. His name is Emmett Watson, and he's sent home to Nebraska from this place where he's been housed. He served 15 months for involuntary manslaughter. And when he returns home, his father has passed away. Their home is going to be foreclosed upon and given back to the government. And so he's responsible for his, I think, 8-year-old brother, Billy. Yes, 8-year-old brother. So he decides he's going to take this car that his dad had, and he's going to take Billy out west and really just try to start a new life and hope that they can, recover from this incarceration and find honest work and a safe place to live. Sadly, though, 2 of Emmett's inmates that were in the prison with him have escaped, and they have hidden in the back of this car. The story is about how they will make their journey as they had planned while also discovering these stowaways. There are a number of characters in this book, some likable, some not as likable, but to be quite honest, even the unlikable characters were not annoying to me. At first, they were, and at first I was like, are you kidding me right now? Like, why are you getting in the way of these 2 boys that I really, really like, these characters that I'm really, really rooting for? However, you learn their stories too. And in one case, one of their stories becomes something that I never expected. I would say that the character development of this one was really what sold me, and the plot of this book was pretty consistently paced. I really was surprised by how much I liked this book. And I don't know why, because it's gotten rave reviews and nothing he's written has ever been tanking that I can tell. But I just wasn't sure that it was going to hit for me, but it really, really did. And this was a backlist for me too, because it had come out in October 2021. So I'd had it for a while, and I'm so happy that I got to it. I also read pretty early on in the year The Frozen River by Ariel Lawhon. This one seems to be a little divisive at times. I just was reading some comments the other day from somebody about how they felt like this character was too far-fetched. Historically, she wouldn't have behaved in that way. She wouldn't have had the freedom to do those things. I'm not sure that I believe that to be true, because there was a bit of historical context about this particular woman who was a real-life human being in history, but I don't know. I will say, though, that I really, really enjoyed this book. Historical fiction as well. I had a good bit of historical fiction to read this year. And it is about a midwife who lives in this small community, and she's been taking care of these pregnant women for a long, long time. She does some other medical support, but for the most part, she is helping them to birth their babies. And there is a man who's found dead in the water in the frozen river. And so there's an investigation that ensues as a result of that. But also there are some other things that are occurring around her ability to be seen and respected as a midwife. And there's another guy that starts to kind of mess with her life and her ability to be respected as a medical professional. She has a backstory that is heartbreaking as well. She has children. She has a husband. She has just so much depth to her, and the bravery and the courage that this woman showed in this book, but probably also in real life, is just an incredible story. So I found myself really enjoying this one, and I was really also kind of surprised that I would. I'd heard heard good things about it, but I just wasn't certain that it was going to be a book for me. Sometimes historical fiction, especially when it's in a big size like that, can get to be a little overwhelming for me, or it slows down and I tend to not pick it back up. But I really flew through this one as well, and I really recommend that one and to a lot of people because it was just that good. Another one that everyone seems to be talking about, some mixed reviews on this one too, but The Women by Kristen Hanna was one that really stood out for me too as a five-star read. I have read other Kristen Hanna books before. Her newer titles are definitely more appealing to me than some of her old titles because I read, I think it was The Magic Hour this year, and it was just okay for me. But The Women was good for me because it was a different era. It was a different historical time, and one that I grew up in as a young person, but didn't know as much about as I do now, particularly in response to how many women served in the Vietnam War as nurses and were not honored for that, were not remembered for that, and really went through a very difficult time, just as their male peers did. It's just sort of an untold story, and Kristen Hanna told it, I thought, very beautifully. It was compelling. You follow this character and fall in love with her, Frankie McGrath. She enlists to serve in Vietnam because her brother had been drafted and they didn't know what happened to him, and she wanted to serve her country as well. Her father and her mother were not fans of the fact that she had decided to serve in the war. There's a lot of backstory there. There's a lot of forward story that occurs during this. She meets some other women that are in the same place as she is. She meets some other people as well. It's just a beautiful saga that closes the circle at the end, which I really like too. I'm not going to tell you how it ends, but you definitely, I felt very satisfied by the way that it ended. And I think a lot of people did too. Quite emotional, quite gripping, and quite well done. I reread Fahrenheit 451 by Ray Bradbury this year, and that was part of a book club that I am a member of now. Some bookish friends and I get together every month and we read a different book each month. I had not read Fahrenheit 451 since I think high school, maybe even junior high. It's been a really long time. It is a classic. It is, though, kind of timeless because of the way that it's written. If you're not familiar, this is about the future where books are being burned and people are not able to read those books because the government feels as though the information that's in these books will cause an insurrection and will just create havoc. And so there's a lot of rules and regulations that people are having to live in this time period. What makes this timeless is that it was written way back in the 50s, and it's still being read, and it's still an issue. Banning books and burning books is still a concern for people, and it still feels like it's set in the future, even though this is the future when he actually wrote it, right? So it's quite something. I was surprised by how it still stands up for me and for most readers. This was an anniversary edition, so it was read by Tim. Oh, Tim, what's your last name? Tim Robbins, I think is his name. I didn't find it, but I think it's Tim Robbins. Not the best narrator for me personally, but not terrible, I would say. And this one, it is really a study of, again, sort of how people's views about things can be changed by their ability to meet with someone and talk to someone who sees a different perspective. I just can't say enough about Fahrenheit 451, and I was pleasantly surprised by how much I loved it again all these years later when I had kind of set a lot of those memories aside. All right. A nonfiction book that really stood out for me this year was The Light We Carry by Michelle Obama, Overcoming in Uncertain Times. This was just what I needed. I probably am grateful that I read it before some things unfolded at the end of the year because perhaps I had a little bit more hope already as a result of having read this. But Michelle Obama really talks about the challenges that we've been through in the last few years, in particular since, the pandemic and since some of the changes in our political system have occurred and the elections and the insurrection, and there's so many things that have really been devastating to us as a nation. And so she really talks about when these things are happening around you, how do you stay grounded? How do you keep your footing? How do you keep your balance and your optimism and your desire to keep going and to help others and to overcome some of these challenges? I loved this so very much. Her voice is present for me in my head whenever I read physically any of her books, and I did read this one physically more than I did anything else. She really does share a lot of her time in the White House, a lot of the experience with her mom taking care of her girls, a lot of her experience with trying to come to terms with what was happening with her husband and 2 terms and way longer than she probably anticipated, and then the transition after. I really, really enjoyed this a lot, and I really do recommend it if you're a fan of memoirs and you like Michelle Obama. It's really the power of the light we carry is really the focus of this, and that together we really can be the light, right? We can shine a light for others when they are in the darkness. All right, another one. This was sort of late in the year, The Briar Club by Kate Quinn. I had not read any Kate Quinns before, but I had been collecting them for a number of years. I had started The Diamond Eye and did not yet finish it. Probably going to get back to that. But I read this one also I think for a book club. Pretty sure that was why I picked it up. But I really loved this book and I got through it pretty quickly too. It had a few moments that almost made me not give it 5 stars. There is a character in this book that is not a human. And I'm not always pleased with that choice by novelists, but I got over it. There was another book that I never really got over and haven't gotten back to yet, but in this case I did. This is about a number of women who live in this boarding house, and it is called the Briar Club, and they get to meet each other and then different experiences in their lives, different places that they work. Some work for the government. It's set in Washington, D.C., which made me even happier. Some do not work for the government. One woman has a small child. Her husband is not there to help her with that child. He's serving somewhere else. It's just really incredible. It's set in the 40s, 50s, sorry. I think in the late 40s, early 50s. I just absolutely loved this. I would definitely reread this again. I think Kate Quinn is a remarkable writer, which means I probably will love The Diamond Eye once I get back to it. Absolutely loved it. So, Washington, D.C., 1950, all-female boarding house in the heart of the U.S. Capitol where secrets hide behind respectable facades. Yes, yes, and yes. All right, and the last one, which I think is the top, but it's very close to some of these others as well, is Conclave by Robert Harris. I mentioned in a video as I wrap this up that I had watched this film with my partner. We try to go to the movies about once a month, and I had not heard of Conclave, but I had seen the previews for it, and it looked like something I really wanted to see. It had a number of pretty significant actors in it that I really enjoy and love, and I'm noticing now that the awards nominations are coming out, and some of those actors have been nominated for different awards. Isabella Rossellini the other day was nominated for a Golden Globe, and a number of the other characters have been as well. So it's really probably going to have some Oscar buzz. I would be surprised if it didn't. But it was really, really well done. But because it was so well done, and because I'd never heard of it, when we left the theater, I immediately searched my library for a copy of Conclave and was happy to discover that they had it there. So I read it, and by reading it, I say I devoured it. It was so good, and I read right after we saw the movie, so it was still in my mind. The movie followed the book pretty well, for sure. There wasn't any real surprises there. But what I loved about it was just the uniqueness of this plot and the process that it delivers as a result. So the premise of this is that the Pope dies one night, and all of the cardinals are then, of course, tasked with coming together for the conclave to be able to select a new pope. There are several that are in leadership positions that come forward, and they have different positions in that leadership realm that they have to execute as well. And so they're all kind of trying to work together, while then I think 118 or so of these cardinals from all over the world are brought forward to the Vatican to be able to begin the conclave, which is, of course, a closed event. There is no like sharing of who you voted for. It's very secretive, and it usually takes more than one vote. And lots of other things happen in this story around this same framework of this plot. And I absolutely loved it. I devoured it. I will say this, that I have a bit of a fascination for the Catholic Church and the way that they worship and the way that they have things structured. I always have since I was a kid. I was not raised Catholic, but I had friends who were Catholic, and I was raised Lutheran, which I call Catholic light, really, but not not ever really belonging to a Catholic church. And I've done some research over time about the history and origins of the Catholic Church, but there's lots that I don't know. What I do know, though, is that I'm drawn to this. I'm really just fascinated by this process and what happens there. So I have long experienced a love of books about Catholicism and that are set, in these kinds of places with these kinds of plots. So this was just like candy for me in many, many ways. But what I really appreciated about it was the way that it ended. And I can't tell you what that is because it would spoil it, but it was so fantastic that I can't even imagine how Robert Harris came up with this idea in his head. But I'm so very grateful that he did. So I highly recommend that. And if there was one that has a little bit more of a shine to it than the rest of these that I've brought forward, that one is it. So I do plan to purchase that one so that I can reread it. And I'll probably read another by Robert Harris as well, just to kind of get a feel for his writing style. But again, he was one of those authors that I had never read before and hadn't really heard of. Last year was a very interesting reading year for me, just for that reason. I just was introduced to a lot of authors that I wouldn't have if I hadn't opened myself up to different possibilities, right? So thanks for watching today. Thanks for your patience with me as I unfolded all of these, as well as, the time that it's taken me to be able to get back to you on this kind of thing. But I've really had a remarkable review of the last year of reading, and I'm already beginning with a pretty remarkable start. So that makes me very, very happy as well. So let me know what your favorites were last year, if any of these came into your purview and made it to your top however many lists that you created in 2024. Let me know if you've read these authors before, or if there are other titles that you think I definitely need to take a look at. I am more than happy to do that. Thanks so much for all your support, your comments, your patience with me, as I don't get to those comments very often, but I will. And as always, happy reading. Bye.